That whole lone wolf idea of like asking for help is weak. I got mentorship and I learned how to basically organize myself internally. So it's like instead of being controlled by emotions, I had the awareness and the ability to navigate them so that in the moment when hard things and difficult stuff was happening, I can slow things down and choose how I'm going to be responding as opposed to being reactive. Everybody has this going on. And unless you were really taught about the nervous system and how that impacts you, how your past is impacting your present, it's like a lot of people just get stuck in cycles and think, well, this is just who I am. And I was that person. And I'm here to tell you, like, that's not who I was. I knew that deep down. If you're listening, that's not who you are either.
Jason, jumping out of the gate, man, what is, in your opinion, the biggest mistake that men, husbands specifically, make when dealing with conflict resolution in their marriages?
Great question. And in my opinion, that would be they're just ready to jump in to solve the problem, whatever the thing that is being brought to them. I really believe that we're wired as men to be fixers, and that's what we do best. And what I've noticed is whenever, especially a wife, a girlfriend, fiance, the feminine in our life bring us issues, is a lot of time what happens is there's an emotion that comes with it, whether that be sadness, stress, anger, anxiety, you name it. When they bring it to us, that evokes that same emotion within us. So we typically, from a societal standpoint, don't necessarily give men the tools to navigate emotions, period, right? The playbook, from like a lot of my clients tell me and myself personally is like, hey, you have feelings, it's like suck it up. It's like, oh, don't cry or push through. So naturally, when we get that emotions brought to us by the person that we care most, it's like we run the playbook that we know, which is like, okay, kind of ignore the emotion. Let's get to problem solving. Let's get into um, the logical issues at hand, because guess what happens when we do that? Well, if I solve the problem, not only do I solve what is the perceived problem from the man's perspective, it's like I solve the emotions that get brought up within me and within you. And that is where I think a lot of men struggle with.
Yeah, no, this is great. There's a very generalized question I asked you there at the beginning, but I do believe, and I hopefully you agree with this, that sometimes we do need to go into problem solver mode immediately. So is there a way that we can kind of determine, based upon the situation, the scenario, or even how the woman is approaching us, this is a problem that I need to solve right now, or I need to step back and kind of let the emotions kind of play out a little bit? Like, how can we determine, like, if I do need to solve the problem or if I need to go that other route that you're kind of speaking to?
Yeah, good question. And, threat, obviously. It's like, hey, there's an intruder in the house. It's like, well, let's tell me how you feel about that. It's like, no, it's like you freaking, you handle the threat. But if it's like, talking about the day and this person at work or the kids or, whatever else is coming up, it's like starting to tune into, it's like, okay, is this my wife or my girlfriend or my fiance bringing something to me and in a way asking for space so that they can just share and let these emotions out, and me being the healthy masculine, like creating a nice strong container for her to just like unload in a way. And then like after that, when you practice active listening, saying like repeating back what you heard, saying things like, yeah, that makes sense, why you'd feel that way, you can just ask her, hey, do you need my help problem solving here, or you just want some space to share? And then there's no confusion at all. And then it's like, because I don't know if this has happened to you in your relationships, but it's like, you come up with, you've already got the best answer locked and loaded in your head. You're like, bump, bump, bump. Oh yeah, I know how to fix this. And you offer the solution, and then she looks at you and is like, God, why do you always try to fix things? Right? And it's like, now if you're able to just lean in and then just in a way ask consent and just say, hey, do you need my help here? Because like I know you're a perfectly capable, you know, woman and have agency and all the things. And it's like if she says yes, then all of a sudden she's welcoming that. And then there's no like feeling like, like why doesn't she respect me? She doesn't want to take my influence, all these things, when really it's just a miss. It's like she needs this and you're giving her this up here. It's like ordering a pepperoni pizza and then like getting Hawaiian, and then like you're the one giving the Hawaiian and you're like, why is she upset? And it's like, well, she asked for pepperoni, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so contextualized here too. I think if obviously if your relationship is having communication issues, you should be aware of these type of things. And I'm sure there's certain relationship dynamics out there where the woman is always kind of looking for you to solve a problem. I think it's so specific to kind of the relationship, who the two people are, and you should know, right? Like, is she always coming to me for the problems? But yeah, I think asking for that permission. I forget where I heard that, but I don't think it was a guest that we had on the podcast, but it was definitely something I've struggled with in the past, was always going immediate to solving the problem. And somebody was like, hey, step back and say, hey, do you just want me to listen and be here to give you space to talk right now? Or are you looking for my help in solving the problem that you're dealing with? And oftentimes it's asking of that permission that's going to kind of open the door. But like, okay, here's how we're going to navigate this moving forward. Yeah. What are the biggest emotions that, maybe not the biggest, or the most common emotions that guys have a hard time with processing?
Good one. I mean, I would say all of them, but that's not true. I'd say like what what is like what has, I guess, society generally speaking said like the feelings that are okay for men to feel. And generally speaking, that's anger, right? And so I mean really most of the other emotions, I mean especially the ones that kind of drop you down into a lower state. We do a lot of nervous system work. I think that's something that really caught my eye with like the stuff that you do, and like how I would put that in my way of talking is like kind of a red state, which is like the slow, like shut down, immobilized things like that have a relationship to kind of like sadness or grief, where sometimes the expression of that physically could be crying, being sad, um, frozen, not being able to move. I think generally speaking, we as men are kind of taught to be doers, right? So it's like it's kind of counterintuitive for us to be like, wait a second, you're telling me that I have to slow down and I have to like just sit by myself for a few hours and like be with some uncomfortable feelings. It's like that's not really action oriented. So it's kind of not comfortable in a way, because not only that, but it's not really modeled for us. So I'd say generally speaking, those kind of like those red emotions.
Yeah. Should men cry?
Yeah, I mean, crying is like a natural body response, right? If crying was something that we shouldn't do, like evolutionarily speaking, we would have like evolved to not cry. So it's kind of like a natural response, whereas like with animals, right, when they get chased by like a prey animal gets chased by a lion or a tiger or something, say like a gazelle or a zebra, one of the things like biologists noticed is like a natural response after getting away from safety into safety is like they start to tremor and tremble, and it's like they shake uncontrollably, right? And then next thing you know, like 5 minutes later, they're out like just like having a good time, just like back to being a gazelle or a zebra. But like if you would to say like to a man gazelle, like, hey, shaking is not okay. You're a big man boy if you shake. Well, it's like then you're taking away a natural release mechanism from like what just happened in fight or flight. Well, it's like your cortisol spiked, your adrenaline's going, you've got all this like emotions going on in your body, and a natural way to release that is movement. So I would say yes.
Yeah, no, I get it that it's a natural, biological occurrence that, like your body's crying, right? Like it's like you're not the person that's doing it, it's physiological occurring. I guess maybe a more precise question, would there be times where physiologically your body wants to cry due to whatever's happening, but a man needs to, I hate even using this language here, man up and not cry in the situation? And what would something like that kind of look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And like what you're talking about here is how I'd label that is like a long-term strategy versus like a short-term strategy, right? If like something big just happened to you, and like let's just say you have this really important presentation and you're like choked up with emotion, or like you're a high level athlete or something like that, going into a performance and you had like a breakup, or you lost somebody in your family, or you had something significant that is very top of mind, but it's like you also have this other thing. It's like that's where the masculine can step in and the man can be like, okay, I'm going to put this emotion to the side and let's do this fucking thing, right? Whatever that task is at hand. Now, long term, not sure that I'd recommend that for everybody, because, like, what we suppress and what we resist persists. And eventually that emotion comes up like in different ways. It could come up with us shutting down in our relationships because we're just too overwhelmed by all the things inside of us. It could come out in like volatile anger because we have all this pent up emotion that we haven't felt. And generally speaking, it's like when we're not allowing ourselves to do what our body like is telling us it wants to do, it's like it finds a way to like get your attention. And like unfortunately, usually it's at the expense of the people that we love most, because they're the ones that are around when that release happens.
Yeah, that's great. No, I definitely want to get into the nervous system conversation here, and I think you have a unique framework that you talk about, and how you kind of help men. But I want to kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about your journey into this space. I know you had a career in the real estate. I'm not sure if that's something that you're still actively doing, um, but to me, I think a lot of times men end up in our seats due to life circumstances, like things that we had to go through and process in our own journey and struggles. And then we get on the other side of this and we kind of have this awakening, kind of enlightening moment like, holy shit, like if I would have had, I'm sure Jason needed a Jason at some point in his life, right? And that's how you kind of ended up in the seat that you're in right now. So walk us through that journey experience for you and kind of how you got into this men's coaching space, and specifically the type of work that you're doing with helping men regulate, because you take a unique approach on the regulation of nervous system to improve relationships. Very few people talking about it through that context. So yeah, walk us through, I guess, your experience, your journey that led you here, and then we'll get more into the framework and how you actually help guys. Get back to the show in a second, guys, but real quick, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Magnesium Breakthrough by BioOptimizers. Do you know if you're getting enough magnesium? Because 4 out of 5 Americans aren't. And that's a big problem because magnesium is involved in more than 300 biochemical reactions in your body. Today, I want to talk to you about the most common signs to look for that could indicate you're magnesium deficient. Listen carefully to the end because there's going to be a special offer happening at the end of this that could be exactly what you need. Are you irritable or anxious? Do you struggle with insomnia? Do you experience muscle cramps or twitches? Do you have high blood pressure? Are you sometimes constipated? There are dozens of symptoms of magnesium deficiency, but these are just a few of the most common ones. Now, here's what most people don't know. Taking just any magnesium supplement won't solve your problem because most supplements use the cheapest kinds that your body can't use or absorb. That's why I exclusively recommend Magnesium Breakthrough by BioOptimizer. It's the only full spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 unique forms of magnesium that your body can actually use and absorb. All BioOptimizer supplements are the best in class, guys. I've been working with and using their products for over 7 years now. For some reason you feel differently, you can get a full refund, no questions asked. They're so confident in this that they're going to offer 365-day money back guarantee. Just go to biooptimizers.com/FrankRich. And in addition, we're going to give you a discount if you use code RICH10 for 10% off. Once again, guys, visit biooptimizers.com/FrankRich or click the link down there in the show notes and use code RICH10 to receive 10% off your order today.
Yeah, I mean, dude, you hit the nail right on the head there. And it's like, so I was just basically doing what society and like everybody told me to do, right? I was trying to be the man that I should be. I was checking off all the boxes, producing income, trying to stay in shape, getting the cars, getting the houses, setting myself up financially. And then, that kind of picture was portrayed. It's like, well, and you meet the girl, you marry the girl, and then like, okay, I've checked off all these boxes. It's like, well, why do I just feel like shit all the time? Like, why do I have this anxiety? Why do I like have, just started realizing like, man, maybe I'm drinking a little more than I should be. And it's like, why am I always like feel like I'm chasing something? Right. And it's like I have all the things, right? It's like every time like I get to that goalpost I think is going to make me happy, it's like the goalpost moves. I get that hit of emotion, that hit, that feeling like, oh, here I am. And then next thing you know, it's gone. And, that obviously that takes a toll on a man. It's like whenever you don't feel right about yourself, it's like, guess what? You don't feel right about basically everything in your life because you show up everywhere in your life. And of course, that impacts your work, it impacts your friends, your family, and of course, your intimate relationships. So it's like that had a severe impact on my relationship and, got to a point where like things weren't great. And finally, looked at myself in the mirror and I'm like, okay, I got out of the idea of blaming because that's where I was. It's like, oh, it must be this. Oh, it must be that. Oh, I just need to add this to my morning routine. Oh, I just need to, do hard things, or I just need to like, really get back in the gym. It's like, I was doing all those things. I was training jujitsu, like I'm being healthy. I'm cutting back on drinking. I'm doing, sauna, and it's like breath work, all this stuff. But I still like am not feeling the good feelings. So finally, it was like I took a look in the mirror and I'm like, okay, maybe it's me. Maybe there's something going on here. And that's when I started doing kind of like this inner self-reflective work and like started like asking myself like, okay, why am I showing up this way? And it's like, where did this come from? And to your point on one of the first questions you asked me, it's like I started leaning into those difficult feelings that were like taboo to even feel as a man and starting to navigate and understand like why they're there, like what purpose have they served. And some people call that shadow work, some people call it inner child work, some people call it like reparenting yourself. But really like and in my case, I'd be like rewiring your nervous system and your responses to situations where certain emotions come up, where it's like I was unconsciously, basically reflexively choosing something without my awareness. And I'm like, wait, oh wow. Like when this happens, I do this, and that is affecting my marriage. And so ultimately, I figured that out and I got help. I asked for help because that's the other thing that we're told not to do. It's like, hey, dude, you got to do this by yourself. That whole lone wolf idea of like asking for help is weak. It's like, why would I ask for directions? Why would I ask where that thing is at the store, even though it'll get me there way the hell faster? So yeah, I got mentorship and I learned how to basically organize myself internally. So it's like instead of being controlled by emotions, it I had the awareness and the ability to navigate them so that in the moment when hard things and difficult stuff was happening, it's like I can slow things down and choose how I'm going to be responding as opposed to being reactive. And so I'm like, well, can't imagine any other guys have this problem. But seriously, it's like everybody has this going on. And unless you were really taught, about the nervous system and how that impacts you, how your past is impacting your present, it's like a lot of people just get stuck in cycles and think, well, this is just who I am. And I was that person. And I'm here to tell you, like, that's not who I was. I knew that deep down. And it's like, if you're listening, that's not who you are either.
Yeah, no, I think that'll resonate a lot with, our audience here. And, it's your story and journey, runs very parallel to mine, right? It's like I went out there and I did all the things that I thought I was supposed to do to make myself happy, right? I got into competitive bodybuilding. I chased that, I overcame some insecurities, from my childhood, like around my weight issues and but then I put a lot of my identity into my physique. And then I got into business and entrepreneurship. And then I started to kind of make some money and then I started having some success. And it was like, okay, well, now I can do things that nobody ever really thought I wouldn't be able to do. And then there was this kind of awakening moment for me once I'd gotten into more of the public space, right? I'd had one business that was kind of like I was behind the scenes, not a really front person for that. But then I got into trying to build a fitness company. It's like now I'm creating content, I'm like trying to help people build their body so they can become the greatest version of themselves. Like it's always embedded with this personal development because that's what helped me. But then it was like, it wasn't clicking. It wasn't registering. It was like, well, why isn't my message resonating with anybody? And I had this awakening moment like you, where I looked myself in the mirror and it's like, you're a fraud. You have a secret porn addiction that you're not telling anybody about. You're not the greatest version of yourself, despite having a great physique. How are you ever going to help anybody else accomplish? And I had that. And I was like, but then I also was wrestling with this. Well, I can't be that bad of a person because look at the things that I've been able to accomplish. So has there ever been a moment for you where you've wrestled with this, where it's like you had success, business, the homes, the relationship, yet there was still this missing piece? Like, had you understand what I'm saying? Like, you needed to kind of have that fuel and drive to do the things that you did. So how do you kind of wrestle with that, of saying, okay, well, these missing parts maybe fueled some of the success that I've had?
I mean, you're talking about the daily struggle of any dude that's really looking at himself in the mirror. Because the fact is it's a never-ending journey. And like, there's an ideal of like, yeah, we're all integrated and we are perfect all the time. We're regulated all the time. We're feeling good all the time. But that's just not the truth. And so it's like every day, it's like, I show up and I'm trying to like figure out like how I want to show up and or how, like in my relationship, in my marriage, for example, it's like, how do I want to be showing up versus how am I showing up? And like that gets reflected back to me, and any relationship gets reflected back to you in your partner's state. So it's like, and I think like what you're speaking to, it's like, it's like bringing all parts of you forward and integrating. So like when you're speaking the message, it's like you believe it yourself because you're actually living it. And that's like every entrepreneur's journey, right? It's like, yeah, it's like the whole idea of fake it till you make it is like kind of being sold out there. And it's like, it's pretty hard to fake it because it's like, it's like, I know you go home, you look at yourself in the mirror, you're like, I'm fucking faking it, right? But like when you actually look in the mirror and you see those dark parts that you don't want to look at or you justify, and you finally look at them, it's like it's like the boogeyman underneath your bed, right? The monster underneath your bed you don't want to look at, but then you finally like shine a you're like, I'm gonna do it. You shine the flashlight, and it's just like your bunny from when you were a kid. It's just like all dusty, and it's like, oh, so it's not as scary as I thought it was. And it's like, oh, there are other people that like that are at my level or above me that have struggled with the same thing. And it's like, oh, if I feel this way, probably somebody else feels this way. And that vulnerability and your ability to share and integrate like is a superpower, man. And it's like that's again why I reached out to you in the first place was just like I know there are so many men that struggle with the thing that, with porn addiction and the thing that you're helping people with. And it's like, dude, it takes some balls to go out on a stage and be like, this is my story. Like, this is what happened and this is how I overcome it. Hey, and you can too.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people think that, man, but I got to tell you, man, it's like since I started talking about this, like the amount of peace that I live with now, because it's like, man, when there's that thing that like about yourself and nobody else knows it, it's like there's that just that layer of shame everywhere you go. And when there's nothing in my life that is a secret anymore, like I can step into any room despite what the people are going to think. At 40 years old, at this point in my life, dude, I care. I give two shits what people think about me, to be honest with you. Now, when I was 30, when I was 35, when I was 25, when I was 20, yeah, that was the most important thing, is what did everybody think about me? But I've so far transcended that, man. Now for you, yeah, for you, you've mentioned, that you realized that there was something like within you that there was missing. And you kind of went on this journey, right? Of like, okay, now I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. And you landed on nervous system regulation. Like, how did that happen? I mean, what was the aha moment there where you were like, okay, it's my inability to regulate my nervous system that is actually the root of all of my problems?
Yeah, I mean, thank God for the internet and Instagram. I literally found my mentor through Instagram. And I was just like, because, it's like you get on this journey and it's super natural for people to just like scour the internet for information, Google, YouTube, Instagram, like typing in like, my symptoms and like what's going on here and how can I fix this? And I just saw something that resonated with me that my mentor posted. And I was like, dude, I gotta figure out what this nervous system stuff is. And yeah, the more I dove into it, it's like the more I realized like, oh, my my life makes perfect sense. And like like I heard you say like, yeah, that shame. Because it's like a lot of times, especially when we are lone wolfing when we're by ourselves, it's like we can get stuck in like that shame cycle of like it's me, I'm the one that's bad. It's like, what's wrong with me? It's like I must be broken. And then that's like that gets reinforced by people that like, basically shame you for doing the things that like you're hiding from people. And of course, that doesn't help for you to actually get out and ask for help because, again, you've got that boogeyman under your bed that you're scared to look at. Now, we know when you shine the light under your bed, hey, it's no big deal, bro. But like when you're talking to a person that like hasn't had that experience, it's like this can feel like life or death, right? So when you really start diving into understanding the nervous system, it's like the thing that again that really turned the light bulb on was is like it de-shamed who I was and my perception of me. And then it gave me the tools to integrate those parts of me that like I was uncomfortable sharing with people because of for whatever reason, right? Which of course the term it makes sense is like very much I use that a lot just so you know. So it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Like, oh, that tracks with like why I feel that way. And again, leaning into allowing that to be true just like it relieves you from so much and then allows you to start like actually being present in the moment and then being like, okay, there are these vices that I have. And you can start decoding what it is that's going on and why do I do these things in the first place, as opposed to it just being like kind of like a reflex. And it's just like something that you do that you're ashamed of and you don't know why. Then it's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. Oh, and then you can actually build in the capacity to like start leaning into why you might be doing something and then rewire like I had mentioned before, just like rewiring your response.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go deep here if we can on the nervous system, you know, because I know that's your area of expertise and how you coach and work with men. So, I guess maybe the first place to start is like let's define it, right? So like what is the nervous system and what role, make sure I phrase this question correctly. What role does our nervous system play in our states and our emotions?
Yeah, great question. And really it's like it basically is you could think of it as like a telephone system that connects your body and your brain. And really like its main job, it does a lot of things, but its main job is to keep you safe, right? And it's always running like in the background, right? And outside of your conscious awareness, right? So, like, for example, you don't have to like tell yourself to breathe. You don't have to tell yourself to digest food. Women don't have to like concentrate on making a baby. That like there's things that your body just does and runs in the background. That's your nervous system. So through like we'll call it spidey senses. If you want to get nerdy, you have this thing, it's called neuroception. That's always running 24/7, 365. And what it's doing is it's detecting threat or safety in your environment. Now, this could be like your physical environment of, oh no, there's a bear running at me, right? Threat, maybe imminent threat. Or it could be like, I've got 100 things thinking about right now, tabs open in my mind. Or like, what if my girlfriend's going to break up with me? Oh man, this deal's really got to close, whatever it is. Like things going on in your brain can still give you the same physiological threat response as something that's actually physically happening in your life. So, a good way of putting this would be like, not only that, but it's like things like tone of voice, body language, um, level of sound of your voice. So, there's a difference between like, hey, Frank, what's up, dude? Or, hey, Frank, right? There's two different tones there, and your nervous system is what's in charge of perceiving that. And what's really important about this is like that controls what state you are in. And what I mean by state is I talked kind of a little bit about red. The nervous system's broken down into like two main branches, but three parts. So you have the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. But the parasympathetic is broken down into two separate chains. And to really make it simple, the best analogy out there is like an upside down stoplight. There's green, yellow, and red. And of course, green is connected to the goodness, love, and connection. It's like when you're feeling that joyful, like you want to be social, carefree, you're feeling safe. Yellow is like a sympathetic response, which is fight or flight, mobilization. There's a threat in front of you, and your body's perception is you can either fight this thing or run away. And then lastly is that red. It's like your dorsal response, which is your shutdown, immobilization, um, freeze. Basically, your perception is like whatever it is that's challenging you, you don't have the resources for it. So our response is to shut you down. And again, this could be like, oh, there's a bear and like you freeze, or an attacker and you freeze, especially if, like for women, this is a very common response, especially in like, you know, certain situations. It could be asked like, well, why didn't you fight back? Right? You were conscious. Why didn't you fight back? That's their nervous system just shut. It's like, you can't because you don't have the resources for this. Or it could just be like, you're up against a big project at work. You've got a lot of things going on. Your boss comes in and tells you he needs you to do this thing. And that just like overwhelms your system. And it feels like you lose all the energy out of your body, right? That's like a red response, if you will. And so what's key about this is like our changes in states happen outside of our conscious awareness. And bringing this back to um, the first question you asked of like what men do wrong in conflict, it's like what happens usually is in that conflict, our wife is in a, let's just say, a yellow or a red state. And we take on that yellow or red state outside of our conscious awareness. Again, if we don't know what's going on, we don't have the skills and the tools to know what's going on, we go into yellow too. Why is that even important? Well, when you're out of green and in yellow or red, in those threat yellow or red responses, one really important thing is happening. And that is the smart part of your brain, which we're getting nerdy here, your prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of, guess what? All your executive functioning, your ability to delay gratification, your ability to like problem solve, your impulse control, your ability to regulate your emotions, gone, right? So again, why is that important? Well, those are things that you probably want online if you're in the middle of a conflict or a heated argument or an emotionally charged argument, especially with somebody that you really care about. So ideally, when you're in conflict, getting into kind of like relational stuff, you want one person out of green at a time, right? And your idea in those situations, like you hang on to green and be aware, like, oh God, okay, I feel the emotions, the physical sensations of what it feels like to be stressed or angry. That's my, again, spider senses, nervous system, neuroception detecting threat. And without conscious awareness, it runs the playbook that we've learned over time, which again, going back to why men fix, it's like we are unconsciously running a playbook that we have learned over the course of our life to fix this.
No, absolutely. That's great. And I think, the examples that you gave, that everybody can kind of, resonate with those different states. We've had multiple conversations in and around the nervous system. So people are familiar with parasympathetic versus sympathetic, your rest, digest, then your fight or flight. But, I think bringing in the red, that kind of freeze, you hear rest, digest, fight or flight, or freeze, and I think everybody's been in a point in a situation, maybe not out in the wild when a bear confronts you, but at some point in our life, if you've been an adult long enough, you've had those moments where you're just kind of paralyzed, paralysis by analysis, almost to a certain extent. And I don't think what you're saying is that we aim at always being in green, because I don't think that would even be humanly possible. But the goal is to have, I guess, tools or the ability that in certain situations we can pull this lever and get ourselves from a yellow into a green. Am I kind of understanding that we're trying to develop the ability, no matter what the circumstance is, that we can pull this lever, do this thing, have this tactic that'll take us from a red, yellow into a green? Is that what we're aiming at?
That's exactly right. And like how I'd put that simply is just flexibility. We want nervous system flexibility to be able to go back and forth in between different states. Because, like, for example, what happens if we're trying to be in green all the time? What we're probably avoiding, right? Going back to like, what do men do? We're probably avoiding yellow or red. There's probably a really good reason why, because based on your history, it probably wasn't safe to be in those states. But yeah, what we want to do is to be able to develop the flexibility to like to go to red, to go to yellow, and then pop back into green, or to take green to yellow and red, and that would be called like a blended state, right? Because yellow sympathetic isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's mobilization, right? So if you hold hands with green while you're in yellow, well, guess what? That's play, right? The feeling, the felt sense of anxiety versus excitement are very, very similar, right? You could feel like you want to go throw up before you go on stage or get on a podcast or do a big event, right? And like you could perceive that your appraisal of that might be like, oh no, I'm anxious. Or it could be like, oh yeah, this is that yellow sympathetic energy, my body is giving me free energy to fucking go do this thing. And again, it's like it's all your perception, and like it's like, oh yeah, my nervous system's being flexible right now. It knows I need to ramp up to perform because I care, because this is a big deal to me, all the things. And just understanding that, like it's so empowering for people because it could feel like, man, I do this thing. Why do I do this thing? Well, it's like, dude, you make sense. You're doing this thing because like you don't want to not have that, right? We don't want to not have that energy because it's what makes us us when we get into those situations where we need to like be able to mobilize, perform, share a message, be there for our family, our friends, whatever it may be.
I love that terminology, nervous system flexibility. You know, you hear metabolic flexibility, you hear that language used in other areas of health, but I never specifically heard it. But I 100% understand, and we've had a conversation around this, going back probably 10, 15 episodes with Dr. Anthony Balduzzi. We were talking about the role parasympathetic and sympathetic played in muscle building. And I shared a story. I don't know if you're a fan of bodybuilding at all, but the current Mr. Olympia, Derek Lunsford, is the only athlete to win a 212 Mr. Olympia. And then this year he took the open title as well. He's done something in the sport that nobody else has been able to accomplish. Well, I had the pleasure to train with Derek when he first moved to Tampa back in 2017. We were training out of MI40 gym with Ben Pekulski. And Ben at the time was known as the bodybuilding yogi. He's the creator of Muscle Intelligence, takes a very intelligent approach to muscle building. But back in 2017, he was talking about the role that our nervous system played in building muscle. Parasympathetic state is an anabolic state. A sympathetic state is going to be a catabolic state. And he pointed something out about Derek back in 2017 that I still remember to this day. And what it was is Derek had this cool, calm, collected demeanor everywhere that he went. For 1 minute, he could turn it on, get into probably a yellow or a red, and crush the set. But then you would see him 10 seconds after his set was done, and he was chilling. He was just so calm and collected. He walked through the gym slower than anybody else. He moved with just a grace that nobody else carried. He would be 35 minutes into a brutal leg workout, but he'd be so calm. He'd like, the dude is like spending time with Buddha. He was just so calm and chilled. And he said, Derek, he didn't use the language nervous system flexibility, but he pointed it out that Derek was going to be a great bodybuilder for a long time because he had the ability to go in and out of these states. Now, obviously, we're talking about it from a muscle building perspective, but in terms of regulating our emotions, it's no different, right? You got to get into red, but then you got to be able to pull it quickly back. So I guess a great question here is, how can somebody know if they are nervous system inflexible? Like, this is something they need to be working on. What's a good sign there for a guy in his life?
Well, I mean, if you don't know anything about the nervous system, then you probably need it, okay?
Okay.
Because like what happens is like you don't know until you know, and then you know, right? It's like it's like seeing the Matrix. It's like taking the red pill. It's like you go through life and you're like, this is life, right? But then you learn about this and you're like, oh, right? And because like once you learn about it, and then you start being able to tune in to like your body and what's really going on and why you do the things that you do. It's like like a lot of times I'll refer to it as it's like it sometimes it can feel like we're driving through life in our car without really knowing the instruction manuals on like what exactly everything does. And like we're slamming around into everything going like, what the hell, right? Well, it's like, dude, nobody taught you how to drive a car, right? So it's like learning the controls. You're like, oh, wow, if I hit that one, that's why I go fast all the time. It's like, oh, maybe I need to learn how to hit the brake, right? Or it's like, maybe I need to learn how to turn the air conditioning on and make it a little more comfortable in here because it's really uncomfortable to even be in my own body, right? And like once you learn how to do this, all of a sudden life changes because it's not so scary, right? Sometimes like we don't go to yellow and red states and those emotions because they feel so big. And it almost feels like, well, I don't want to go there because I'm just going to be stuck there forever, right? That would be a sign of like you feel like you're inflexible. If there are certain emotional states that you just like you can't be in or you don't ever want to go to, and it's like, well, what's the point, right? Well, it's like, again, going back to the idea of like, what's the point of crying? Well, if there was no point in having yellow or red emotions, we would have evolved to not have them, right? But the fact is, unfortunately, we've evolved the other way. So not only do we need those emotions, but we need people. Like we need connection. We're wired for that. And, sometimes in our past, especially for dudes, it's like it's not really safe to feel those feelings and to share them, let alone, be in them. So a lot of times it's like, don't feel those feelings. And then you're like, yeah, okay, got it. And then like you still have them and you're like, what is wrong with me? I've got all these feelings. And then you get to be 30, 40, 50 years old and you have a midlife crisis and you're like, I can't take it anymore. And it's like all that is your body telling you like, hey, mother effer, you're going to feel this and I'm going to destroy your life right now, right? Is it self-sabotage or you just don't know how to be in red?
What happens to our nervous system if for too long we suppress and ignore this? Like, is this the guys that you see that are late in life? And I used to think that these men were maybe stoic. I think I had a skewed perception of what stoicism was. It was like you didn't feel emotions. In reality, it's like stoicism is a 25-year-old, 2,500-year-old version of I think what you're talking about. I think the Stoics understood that your life wasn't going to be absent of these emotions and feelings. You had to learn how to control and regulate them. And I think for me, a long time, I had a blinded view of that a real Stoic was a guy that never experienced any type of negative emotions. Is that what happens to a guy's life? Is if he goes too long with suppressing or not feeling or not processing these, does he become that old 40, 50, 6-year-old man that is just like, this dude is like just a shell of a human being because he doesn't even express or feel any emotions?
Yep. You pretty much nailed it. And it's like, I think like the idea of stoicism, because I was in that same boat where I'm just like, oh yeah, I just need to not feel. And it's like, I think their mantra is more like, don't make decisions from the emotions as opposed to don't feel them at all. And it's like, you're absolutely right with the men that don't feel their emotions. Yeah, you become a shell of yourself because it becomes so unsafe to be flexible and you're inflexible. So it's like if you're inflexible, then you're not gonna feel that, right? And what are the side effects? It's like, well, they're countless, right? Anxiety, there's like depression, there's like, a lot like why like I got into relationships is like that's where most of the time men start to see it for the first time because their wife's like, uh, I don't feel emotionally close to you anymore because you're so inflexible. So then they're like, why is my wife not having sex with me anymore? Right. And then they try, a lot of times we try to reach for what's typical masculine levers. It's like, oh, I'll take her on the nice dinners or nice vacations or nice presents or like, different neighborhood, nice house, nice vacations. Like I'm giving you all this stuff. What else could you possibly need? Well, she needs you to be in red with her and be able to sit with her emotions and just listen to her so that you can develop emotional intimacy. And then guess what happens? It's like all of a sudden the bedroom light's back on fire. So, that's, I think, where most men feel that is with that, or, just not being able to like really step into your purpose, right? Step into the thing that you really want to do. But guess what happens when you step into that and you start your own business, you start your podcast, your YouTube channel, you go for it. It's like you're going to fucking feel yellow, bro. You're going to feel red because you're going to get told no. You're going to be disappointed. You're going to be nervous. You're going to be anxious. So if you don't have the flexibility to be able to bounce in between those states and still hold on to yourself, it's like, well, you're going to all of a sudden like call it imposter syndrome, call it self-sabotage. But really, what is it? It's your nervous system protecting you because you're afraid of feeling those emotions. It's keeping you safe. Remember, I told you, nervous system, keep you safe. Not just from bears, dude, but like, what are other people going to think? What are other people going to say? And if that triggers you into yellow and red, well, guess what? You're going to find every excuse in the world to not do the thing. And after decades of that, finally, you're going to be like, fuck this shit. I'm doing it anyways. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. Right?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned throwing up before a podcast or going on stage, and I'm kind of looking around. Does dude have a camera in here somewhere? Now I've never thrown up before a podcast, but we're 245 episodes into this one. I've probably done 100 guest appearances, 100 plus at this point on people's other shows, and I have a second podcast that we just broke 50. So I've done this 400 plus times in the last 5 years. Jason, I still tell you to this day, man, I get nervous before every single one of those. Now, I have a practice in place now. I cold plunge before every show about an hour before that. So I kind of force myself into a sympathetic, then I do some breathing to kind of bring myself back down. But still, until we're recording, like I am nervous, palm sweating. As somebody has done it now, like I said, 400 times, like you cannot stop this thing from happening. Your nervous system is going to operate because that's what it's there to do. But you can build these tools here. You talked about a great example there with like a lot of times when guys are feeling disconnected, like they'll go to these like masculine things, like go on the date, buy the nice dinner, the flowers, all this stuff. And it's like, no, she's looking for you to be in tune with her. I guess subconsciously or unconsciously, is that what a woman is talking about when she says she feels safe with a man? Is like she's got somebody that their nervous systems are kind of locked in and in tune with. Is that what that means when they say, I feel safe with you?
Yeah, dude. Absolutely. It's like, think about it. It's like, again, she's got spidey senses and a neuroception and her own nervous system that is like detecting threat, right? So if you are inflexible and can't go to yellow and red, and you can't sit with like, disappointment or stress or anxiety or whatever your wife brings you, or your girlfriend, fiance, whatever, you're going to you're like, that is going to come off unconsciously, that feeling is not acceptable, right? Because you're fixing, because you don't want to hear it, because you're frustrated with her bringing it up again. And then guess what? She's going to detect like, ooh, it's not safe to feel this, right? And like every girl has a different level of like, okay, like how much of this do I need versus not? But like, yeah, to feel safe would be like your girl can bring you anything and you just be like, yeah, I know what's going on internally because I'm feeling these feelings, and this isn't, your feelings are yours, not mine. It's not my job to fix you. I have the capacity to be flexible and be with you in yellow and red. And then like know that I don't need to fix you because like I can bounce back into green and not take this on for me. And then next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, I feel so safe with him. I can tell him anything. And it's like he can help me problem solve anything when I do need it. And then you build that trust. And then all of a sudden it's like that. Because really, to like lean into the feminine, like you really have, it's like a state that you relax into. And it's like, well, how do you feel relaxed? When you're safe. So physically, the traditional masculine things is like, hey, I'm protecting you and there's money coming in. What else do you need? Like, what could you possibly not feel safe about? And this is like that big pillar that a lot of men miss. And again, like how I had said, it's like, this is why like I decided relationship coaches, because like this is where men are most like, dude, I'm trying everything. I don't get why. And it's like, bro, you're just have an inflexible nervous system. Here's what to do. And then next thing you know, they're like, dude, it's just like, again, you take the red pill and your life changes.
The real red pill, man. Yeah, the red pill manosphere space online speaks more to that. Just be a high income earner and, provide resource. And it's like you're missing such an important part of it, man. You're missing that ability to connect, the energetic like connection that is necessary and needed. Dude, I've talked about it a dozen times, and the audience is probably going to get, angry at me repeating this again, but I've known three very successful multimillionaires that could have given their wives and partners anything the world desired. Like relationships all crumbled in the last 18 months because it was they didn't have that connection, and they've realized it. And I'm friends with these guys now, and they're on their own journey of healing and self-discovery. But let's get a little bit tactical if we can. Obviously, if the guys want to go deep into your work, we'll point them to your Instagram, to your podcast, everything, the coaching that you're doing to get the full blueprint, right? But maybe we can give them kind of 1-2 steps here today. So if the guys recognize this, hey, I know nothing about the nervous system, I'm glad I stumbled on Jason, on the Superhuman Life here. We want to give them something to kind of walk away with. So I guess in terms of building some tools, or I like to use the language skill sets, right? I think these are skill sets that must be built and acquired. So what are some first 2 steps, 3 steps that a guy can take, like leaving here today, to begin to build that nervous system flexibility that we've been talking to?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And really, like the first thing that you want to start tuning into is like what's going on within you. And the nerdy term to that is interoception. So you have the neuroception, what's like, hey, what's going on outside of me? And then interoception is your perception of what's going on outside of you and what's going on inside of you, and how you actually appraise what that means. And this is where most men start because, we usually are up in our heads, right? We're trying to make logical sense out of things because like we just like don't have any reps into actually feeling what is going on and like what that actually means, what it means about us, what it means about the situation. So when you're in, let's just say somebody that is in a relationship, and the next time you're in conflict, start to notice like what physical sensations do you feel when your wife gets upset or your girlfriend gets upset? It's like, oh, wow, I never noticed it, but I have this like tingling in my chest or this tightness or this pit in my stomach or like a heaviness in my arms or this like thing in my neck or this lump in my throat, right? Physical sensations are key indicators that your state is changing. So the number one thing that I always start by teaching men is like, okay, what state are you in? Right? How do you tell what state you're in? Well, one of the things that happens in a state change is a physical, or some people, the nerdy term, a somatic response, which just means of the body, right? And why that's so important is, and why men have such a difficult time is, remember, we change states outside of our conscious awareness. So how are we supposed to know? Well, we start tuning into ourselves, and then it's like, oh, there's that thing. Oh, maybe I'm reflexing into like standard operating procedure. And it's like if that's not how you want to show up and it's something you're actively trying to change, noticing that is the first key. So tuning into yourself. And then before you respond to anything, like again, a form of regulation is getting back into more of like a calm, safe state. So if you're in a yellow, something that you can do is taking deep breaths and specifically where the exhale is longer than the inhale, because what that does is it activates what's called a vagal brake, which physiologically tells your body you are safe. Because if you weren't safe, then you would be taking shallow breaths, right? Shallow exhales. So it's a way to actually like, just like cold plunging, right? Like what happens after you're done with cold plunging? It's like, dude, you just feel like you have that natural body expression of that safety because like you've come back to a state of calm. Well, guess what? If it hasn't been safe for you to have conflict or you grew up where there was no repair after rupture and like conflict never ends well, your body is naturally going to be prepping for a fight or a flight as opposed to like, okay, maybe I'm safe right now. What am I feeling? Can I take a deep breath before I respond? Or maybe I don't even need to respond. And like the last tactical thing I'd say, especially with conflict, especially in situations where your significant other is bringing you something, just ask, like, hey, do you just need me to listen? Or do you want some tactical advice to help problem solve this? Dude, that solves so many problems for dudes. I can't even tell you. And you'll find that like 90% of the time, she's like, I just need you to listen. Cool. There's zero responsibility on your end to fix anything, and if you just allow that, hmm, super, super key.
I think the breath, man, and the ability to control the breath is like I don't know what I call it a superpower, but it's definitely a gateway to so many other things within our life. You know, we're talking about a lot of this nervous system stuff is happening kind of unconsciously, and I forget where I heard it said, but it's like the breathing. I think is the only nervous system function that operates unconsciously that we have the ability to take conscious control over. We can't consciously control our digestion. We can't consciously control our heart rate. Now we can impact our heart rate through our breathing, but we actually have the ability to consciously control our breathing. It's going to happen unconsciously or if it didn't, you wouldn't be alive anymore, but you can take that conscious control over it. So I always think that that is a superpower that every guy needs to learn, no matter what is happening in your life. If you're struggling with porn, learn to control your breathing. If you're struggling with conflict resolution, learn to control your breathing. If you're struggling with making progress in the gym, learn to control your breathing. If you're struggling with breakthroughs in your business, or you're struggling with closing sales calls, learn to control your breathing and do some breath work before you even get and jump on a sales call. So this is incredible, man. Personal question, maybe two-part question here. What's been the biggest positive change that you've noticed in your relationship and also in your work, in your career since learning this nervous system flexibility?
Yeah, great question. It's like, well, guess what? The intimacy is like really back in my marriage. And it's just like, there's nothing cooler than like being the person for your significant other, right? Like they can come to you, they want to come to you because like they know you're going to be non-reactive and you're just going to sit there and be that cool, calm, collected dude. And like there's nothing better than that. It's like, I don't know, just you feel like a Jedi, I guess. And like
You
with
feel like a
regard
man because I think every guy's probably had a relationship at some point where you find out like 3 weeks later that the woman was dealing with something. You're like, why didn't you bring that to me? And she's like, well, you're always in chaos and you can't. But to have that person, like you said, want to come to you, like, dude, that's like she's safe. She feels safe, right? And I think that's that's being a man. Like,
It's like, yeah. And like that happens not because like you're the ultimate problem solver. It happens because you have your shit organized and you to the point where you know you don't have to take on the other person's stuff. And again, it's like just being that container is just there's nothing like it, dude. And then as far as my business, it's like, well, like I go on podcasts, I have my own podcast. Whenever you start putting yourself out there and you're not selling something, you're selling you. Guess what? You better have a flexible nervous system because shit's going to start flying your way, right? And the higher you go, the more money you make, the more you get out there, the more stuff comes at you, the more bullets are flying at you. And again, going back to like the Matrix kind of example, you want to be able to like stop those bullets and freaking move out of the way.
yeah, you want to test your nervous system, man. Start throw some real vulnerable content out there into the to the inner sphere, and have one two piece of content pop off and go viral and make it into what I call the real internet, where you start reaching the millions of views. Like, you'll be tested, man, because you're gonna have some things said back to you that's gonna, like, you're either gonna respond or you're gonna want to respond. And I think how you kind of navigate through that is a big test, man. What does face a storm mean, man? It's I've been staring at it on your hat for the last 56 minutes.
So it's kind of like a motto, right? It's like I've felt for so long that there was kind of like this dark cloud following me around. And like what I found out, it was all those emotions and that shit that I was told to suck up and like don't be a baby about. That just like wouldn't leave me. And then finally I'm just like I had to face it. And that's the idea. It's just like face the storm, right? Because like guess what? It's like a storm, a wave, anything that comes at you like that never lasts forever. And the more you're able to like learn to surf the wave of emotion or the storm that's brewing and coming into your life, it's like you're like, "Oh, okay, I did it." Right? And like the flexibility comes when it's like, man, that 1 to 3 foot wave or that like squall that came through seemed so big at first. And now it's just like, hmm, maybe I'm going to go start a podcast or start a business or like be vulnerable and ask for something that I really want from my partner, right? That's scary because I'm afraid of rejection. And then next thing you know, you're fucking surfing the like 12 footers or you're just like going through like this big storm and it's no big deal. And people ask you, like, dude, how'd you do it? You're just like, I just started by facing the storm, man.
You know the story of the American bison? Yeah, yeah. So, it's the only, and I don't know if it's the only one, but, one of the only animals out there in the wild that when confronted with a big winter storm turns, faces it, and runs through it. And, it's for two reasons. One, it knows it's going to spend less time in the storm. So you run from your storms, they're going to be present a whole lot longer. You run through them, they're going to last for a shorter period of time, but it's also going to prepare you for the next one. You only grow into more of your potential by doing things that you haven't yet done. And oftentimes it's those storms that equip us for the bigger storm. So that's amazing, man. Jason, this has been such an incredible conversation. So glad we got connected, man. Big fan of the work that you're doing out there. It's needed for guys in all the spaces, all the dynamics. So tell the men out there, tell the audience, tell the listeners where they can find you, connect with you, where you're hanging out most online, and if there's anything that you want to point them to in terms of resources. And we'll wrap it up with our last and final question.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm most active on Instagram, Jason Schnitzer Coaching. And then I've got my own podcast. It's called The Self Control Show, where I just kind of do little chunks of like how to deal with certain things. And, like I had mentioned before, it's like I specialize in helping men, basically develop a flexible nervous system and how that can apply to, your intimate relationships, marriage, whether you're in a marriage or you're dating somebody or long term or whatever. So.
Yeah, incredible. And guys, we'll have all that plugged down there in the show notes. Connect with Jason. Great content. Podcast is amazing. Last question here. We love to end the show here with the same question for all of our guests. So the title of our podcast obviously is called The Superhuman Life. For me, this has been a 5 year kind of journey that I've been on and kind of figuring out and defining what that ultimately means to me. And I've kind of landed on, as a man of faith that, I do believe that we're here for a purpose. There's a calling. There's something that every single one of us is supposed to be doing. You're clearly kind of walking and operating in that right now. But most Christians, most believers would tell you that, yes, there is a purpose for your life. And I think a lot of them stop there. I think it becomes superhuman when you take intentional effort and a growth centric approach in developing the skill sets needed to bring that purpose to the world in service of others. So that's how I define living a superhuman life. But I love to always get the guest takes. So Jason Schnitzer, as we end today's conversation, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Yeah, I mean, I love your definition and the idea of like living in your purpose. And like what I'd say is like how you're showing up in your purpose is like how you make others feel by the way you're showing up and doing what you do so that you inspire them to do the same things in their life.
Yeah, love that. And guys, it's going to need nervous system flexibility and self-regulation tools in order to accomplish that. So connect with Jason, follow him on Instagram, listen to his podcast. If you got value out of this episode, you can support us in 2 ways. First off, head over to Apple, Spotify, wherever you're consuming the show. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. But more importantly, if somebody in your life needs to hear this conversation, do us a favor and then a blessing by sharing this episode with them. But for Jason Schnitzer, your host, Coach Frank Rich, we love you guys. We'll see you in the next one.